Okay, this is Algebra 1. This is Unit 1, Section 4, Function Notation. So we introduced functions last class period, and I just want to reiterate that a function, a function is a type of equation where for each x value, or for each x value, there is exactly one y value. Okay? So it's a special type of equation. We're going to kind of talk about that today. And what we'll do, just before we go on, we talk about our objectives. We need to interpret function notation that models a real-world situation, identify the input and output of a functional relationship, pointing out constraints on the domain and range, and then use function notation to represent a functional relationship. So here's what you see, okay? And this is pretty standard, but what you see is this thing here where it says f of x. So f parentheses x means that this is a function in terms of x, okay? So basically, when I say f of x, this is a fancy way of saying a y value. Okay? And so, but the weird thing is how they describe it, how, this value right here, this x, this is your input, okay? And like what it says, this is your x value, all right? And then the entire thing, f of x, okay, once you plug that value into your equation and you spit out a y value, the output is your y value, all right? So, okay, let's take a look at, and the other thing I want to talk about is that when you have something in function notation, okay, your function value, which is your y value, is always isolated on the side. Okay, it's always some function value equals whatever your expression is. Okay, so it says this. It says, consider the function represented by the equation 2r is equal to s plus 1. Explain why this is not in function notation as it is written. Okay, so here's what you've got. First of all, number one is that no variable is isolated. Okay, that's number one. Okay, but if I took, say, 2r is equal to s plus 1, let's say I divide everything by 2, by 2, and by 2, and solve this for r, then I would get that r is equal to 1/2 s plus 1/2, okay? So what we could say here is that this is a function r in terms of x. Or in terms of s, I'm sorry. Okay? So it's kind of like this, all right? You could also say this, all right? R of s is equal to 1/2 s plus 1/2. Okay? This is really in function notation, all right? All right, let's move on. Let's talk about, all right, so back over here when it says the meaning of f of x is the output value of f when the input value is x, okay? Basically what this means is that this is a y value, okay? And that we plug x in to see what y is, to see what the y value is. Okay? So then it asks us this, and I struggled with this for a very, very long time, okay? So what does f of 1 equal 7, what does that mean? And that's a really, really good question, okay? What this means is that x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 7, okay? So really, this is a point on a graph. Okay? And it would read it as 1, comma 7. All right? So, and here's what you kind of have to think about, okay? For this, okay, you plug 1 in for x and 7 is the value for y. Okay? And that's what that means. Okay, this top question says, what is true about the function g of x is equal to negative 2x squared plus 5, okay? We can use, same thing, if I say g of x, we saw f of x earlier, g of x, this still represents a y value. Okay? So we want to know what is true. G of x is the multiplication of g and x. That is no. Okay? Negative 2x squared plus 5 is the input of the function. No, the input is just x. So that's a no. Okay? The variable x represents the independent variable. This is true. Okay? And the variable g represents the input of the function. That is no. Okay? All right, so then it says the ordered pair, you have all these ordered pairs define a function. So 1, negative 2, 5, 0, 0, 3, and 3, 5. Okay? They define a function. Okay? It says, how can the ordered pair 1, negative 2 be written using function notation? So the way I would say that is if I take some function and plug in 1 for x, I get a y value of negative 2. And that's what I'm looking for. Okay, the next question says, what is the value of f of 0? So when I have this question, I'm basically asking, what is the y value when x equals 0? Okay, so I look up over here, at all these points, and I notice that I have an x value of 0 up here. All right, that's right there. And so what's the y value when x is 0? And the y value is 3. So if I said f of 0 is equal to 3. Okay. And then it says over here, for what input does f of x equal 5? So another way of asking this is, what is the x value when y equals 5? Okay, so I come over here and I look at all these points and I say, okay, I have a y value of 5 that's right here, all right? What's the corresponding x value, all right? And so that value would be 3. And so you would say here on this one that x is equal to 3, and that's your answer. Okay? Okay, over here, we have this table of values, okay? We have x values, and then we have f of x values. Another way of saying f of x is y. It's a y value. Perfect. Okay? So it says that the ordered pair, It says when f of x is equal to negative 2, so basically, for us to say this, is the y value, y equals negative 2 when x is equal to what? Okay, so I come over here and I look at my function value table and I notice that I have a negative 2 right here. All right, so this is my negative 2, okay? And then what's the corresponding x value when that happens? It's 4. So x is equal to 4. Okay? Okay, if I take a look at this, so we've got our domain, we have our range. What's another word for domain? Yeah, these are x values. If I say range, these are y values. Okay? So we have a functional relationship here, and it says, okay, well, what is f of negative 7? So we ask the question, okay, when x is negative 1, or when x equals negative 7, then y is equal to what? Okay, so we come over here and we say, all right, well, if I have negative 7, if that's my x value, then my corresponding y value is negative 4. So I come over here, and I'm just going to write that y is equal to negative 4. Okay, or you could just say that f of negative 7 is equal to negative 4. Okay? And then we have this. It says, for what input value does f of x equal 3? Okay, so input, that's another word for what? X value. So for what x value does f of x equal 3? Okay, remember f of x, that's a y value. Okay, so I find a y value of 3. What's the corresponding x value? And that's 2. So we would say here that x is equal to 2. Okay, so guys, a lot of this is just being able to read it and understand it and to know what it's asking. Okay? All right. So we've got this functional relationship, and it says complete the statement. So f of 3. So again, this, when I see this, it's saying when x equals 3, then y is equal to what? Okay? So I'm going to come over here. All right, I'm going to say f of 3 is equal to what? So remember, domain is my x values, range is your y values. So when x is 3, what's our y value? And that's going to be the value of negative 1. So f of 3 is equal to negative 1. Okay, and all that does is really just correspond to a point, 3, negative 1. They all mean the same thing, just a different way of writing it. Okay? All right. On this one, it says a tablet has 32 gigabytes of storage available, and each video download requires 2 gigabytes. The amount of storage left in gigabytes is represented by the variable s. Okay? So s is equal to storage space. Okay? And then, and the number of videos downloaded is represented by the variable v. So s equals storage space, and v is equal to the number of videos downloaded. Okay? So here's the thing. Which one depends on which? Does the number of videos you download depend on the storage space, or does the storage space on your computer depend on the number of videos you've downloaded? Which one depends on what?
The amount of videos depends on the amount of storage.
Yeah. So you have a certain amount of storage on your computer, and then you go, okay, well, if I download this many videos, then my storage space will go down, or if I delete them, they'll go back up. Okay, so we have to figure that out. We have to figure out what depends on what. Okay, so this is your dependent variable. Dependent, and v is your independent. Okay. So that's how we kind of have to figure that out. We kind of have to ask that question, because then independent means these are x values. Okay, dependent means y values. Okay? And I'm always going to put it back into those terms. Okay? But we have to be able to look at different values. Okay? Then it says write a function that models the relationship between the storage left and the number of videos downloaded. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this. My storage space S, okay, is equal to, I start off with 32, right? I have that constant, that's what I start with, 32. And then every video we download requires 2 gigabytes. So I have 32 gigabytes, but then I need to subtract off 2 gigabytes per video. Okay? I came up with this. All right? The reason why I use the subtraction symbol is because we have 32, we're taking gigabytes away from that. All right? Now, another way, if we really wanted to write this in function notation, I would say S of V is equal to 32 minus 2V. Okay? And that's really what we're after, is coming up with that. All right? Kind of tricky, but that's what we got to use. Okay? Okay, let's take a look at this next one. It says, Andrea conducts a science experiment and observes that the height of a plant depends on the amount of sunlight it receives. It says the plant's height is 37 centimeters, and it grows at a rate of 0.004 centimeters per hour of sunlight. If the number of hours of sunlight is represented by the variable S, which function can represent the height of the plant? Okay, so the hours of sunlight is represented by the variable S. Okay, that means that S needs to be our independent variable. Okay, this is like our X value. All right, and what I notice is that in each of these, I see that S is the only independent variable in this last one. Okay, so it's right there. All right, we start out at 37 centimeters, and then we grow by 0.004 centimeters per hour of sunlight that we have. Okay, and that kind of helps me too. 0.004 centimeters per hour of sunlight. Okay, so that's a rate. Okay, when I see rate, okay, that's my slope. Okay, and then we take that hours of sunlight is represented by the variable S. So I would take 0.004 and multiply it by S. And that's how I get that. Okay? It doesn't really tell us anything about H. It doesn't tell us, describe what H is or anything like that, so our only option is this last one here. Okay? All right. The next one says an 8-inch candle burns at a rate of 0.5 inches every hour. Okay? So rate of 0.5 inches every hour. That's important information. Okay? This is our starting point. This is where we start. Has 8 inches. It says write a function that models the relationship between the height of the candle in inches as a function of time in t hours. So I'm going to let h of t equal the height. Okay? T is equal to time. Okay? This is my x value. This is my y value. Okay? If I wanted to write this, well, here's what I know. I know that h of t, we start out at 8, right? 8 inches. And then when the candle burns, what's going to happen to that height? Is it going to go down or going to go up? It's going to go down, right? It's going to burn. So I'm going to subtract off 0.5 inches per hour. Okay? Now, are there any constraints on this graph of this function? Will the graph of the function be a continuous graph or a discrete graph? All right, a continuous graph means that there are no breaks or holes, okay? And so what we know is that if we look at this graph, here is a situation that models this. You know, there are no breaks in this graph, there are no holes. Basically, I can draw this graph without lifting my pencil, okay? But it says, what is the domain and range? So the domain, remember, are the x values. Range is the y values. All right, so if I wanted to talk about my domain here, okay, my domain, I'm going to call that D, and I'm going to use the brackets, and I'm going to say, okay, I've got values of t, and I know that my time that it takes to burn this candle goes from 0 to 16 hours. So I'm going to write 0 is less than or equal to t is less than or equal to 16, okay? If I wanted to talk about my range, r, okay, then I'm using the value h of t, okay? So bracket h of t to talk about my range, and then we're going from 0 is less than or equal to h of t is less than or equal to 8. So the height is in between 0 and 8 inches. The time is between 0 and 16 hours. That's all I'm looking at, okay? That's all I got. Bye.